After years of working a soul-crushing office job, I decided to quit and pursue my passion for motorcycle restoration. I saved up enough to buy a small house in a quiet neighborhood, thinking it'd be perfect for my new laid-back lifestyle. I was unloading my stuff when I moved in when this woman marched up to me, arms crossed, looking like she just sucked on a lemon. She demanded to know what I was doing, her tone accusatory. I explained that I was moving in, having just bought the place. She responded with a warning, hoping I wasn't planning on making a mess, and emphasized that they had standards in the neighborhood. I tried to be polite, but I could tell right away she was going to be trouble. Over the next few months, she complained about everything. My motorcycle in the driveway, the occasional get-together with friends, even the color I painted my fence. It was ridiculous. But things really came to a head last weekend. My buddies were on vacation, and we decided to have a little party at my place. Nothing too crazy, just some beers, music, and good times. We were having a blast, dancing around like idiots and singing along to 90s pop hits. On the second day of our festivities, I noticed Karen's kid coming home. She wasn't around, probably at church or something. I felt bad for the guy, always looking so miserable because of his mom. I decided to chat with him. I approached the kid and commented on his mom being a piece of work, trying not to cause him any grief. The kid just hung his head and agreed with me. When I asked how he managed to live with her, he admitted it was tough, but revealed he had a secret stash of weed in the back shed. Good for him finding a way to cope. I complimented his resourcefulness and then asked if he wanted to come over and hit the bong. His face lit up like a Christmas tree, and he eagerly agreed, mentioning that his mom wouldn't be home until evening. I jokingly expressed disappointment that we wouldn't be able to drive her up the wall that day. So the kid came over, and we had a great time. He was actually pretty cool when he wasn't being suffocated by his mom. We lost track of time though, and before we knew it, Karen came home early. And boy did she lose it. She started yelling about how we were all going to jail, and accusing us of feeding her baby drugs. I tried to reason with her, explaining that her son was an adult who could make his own choices. She threatened to call the police. She ran to her garage screaming like a banshee, waving around a pair of garden shears. That's when my buddy CJ, this huge teddy bear of a guy, tried to calm her down. He suggested that maybe she needed a drink, trying to defuse the situation. Wrong thing to say. Karen went ballistic and actually lunged at CJ with the shears. She caught him in the arm, and there was blood everywhere. Her face went white as a sheet. She started apologizing profusely, alternating between saying sorry and blaming us. CJ looked at me and smiled, telling me to call the cops. So I did. When they arrived, I showed them everything on my security cameras. Karen breaking into my garage, slashing CJ, the whole 9 yards. They arrested her on the spot. Now here's where it gets even better. My lawyer friend is helping us get a restraining order against Karen. She won't be able to come within 500 meters of me or my house, which means she can't even go home. I'm handing over all the audio footage of Karen's meltdowns to the prosecutor. As for her kid, well, he's got some peace and quiet for a while, at least until Karen's court appearance. I've been checking in on him, making sure he's doing okay. He seems a lot happier without his mom breathing down his neck all the time. When I lost my job at the local factory, times were tough, and I needed to make ends meet somehow. That's when I stumbled upon an ad for a dog walking service. I figured, why not? I love dogs, and it seemed like an easy way to earn some cash. For weeks, things were going great. I had a handful of regular clients, and the dogs were always happy to see me. But then I met her, the woman I now refer to as the dog walking dictator. It was a sunny Tuesday when I got a call from a potential new client. She sounded pleasant enough on the phone, asking if I could walk her precious poodle 3 times a week. I agreed, and we set up a meeting for the next day. When I arrived at her house, I was greeted by a woman in her mid-50s, wearing a fancy tracksuit and more jewelry than I'd ever seen on a person going for a jog. She welcomed me in, identifying me as the dog walker. I stepped inside, and that's when the interrogation began. She inquired about my years of professional dog walking experience. I explained that I've been doing it for about a month, but had owned dogs all my life. She interrupted me, criticizing my limited experience and questioning how she could trust me not to harm her precious Fifi. I tried to reassure her, promising that I was careful and attentive, and that all my current clients were satisfied with my services. She reluctantly accepted this, but then informed me she had some requirements for Fifi's walks. I nodded, ready to take mental notes. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. She listed her demands. Fifi was to walk only on the left side of the street, due to sidewalk cracks, wear pink booties at all times, be carried over puddles or mud, and drink only Fiji bottled water during walks. I stood there. Was this woman for real? She continued with more requirements. I had to sing classical music or light jazz while walking, avoid all other dogs by crossing the street, take photos of Fifi every 5 minutes to send to her, hold an umbrella over Fifi in sunny weather, and carry her inside my jacket if it was cold. At this point, I was struggling to keep a straight face, but she wasn't done. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to say something. I apologized and told her that these requirements seemed excessive and that I wasn't sure I could meet all of her demands. She yelled at me, asking if I knew who she was, and threatening to ruin my dog walking business with one phone call, citing her husband's importance in town. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I told her I understood she cared about her dog, but suggested it might be best if she found someone else who could meet her specific needs. She reacted with outrage, accusing me of refusing to walk Fifi and threatening to ensure nobody in town would ever hire me again. At that moment, something in me snapped. I'd had enough of entitled people thinking they could push others around. I sarcastically told her to go ahead and tell everyone about the dog walker who refused to sing opera to her poodle while wearing a hazmat suit and juggling tennis balls, adding that I was sure they'd all rush to her defense. Her mouth fell open in shock. I continued suggesting she also tell people about her very important husband and how she was using his name to bully people just trying to do their jobs. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out the door. As I left, I could hear her sputtering and yelling behind me, but I didn't look back. Word spread quickly in our small town, and to my surprise, most people found the story hilarious. My little dog walking business actually grew as a result. Turns out people appreciated someone who stood up to the local dog walking dictator. I heard she went through 5 more dog walkers in the next month alone. Apparently, none of them could meet her reasonable standards. Last I heard, she was trying to train squirrels in the park to walk Fifi instead. Good luck with that, I say. I run a small business selling handmade crafts. It's not much, but it's mine, and I've poured my heart and soul into it for the past 5 years. We started in my garage, but as demand grew, we needed more space. That's how I ended up renting a couple of storage units in this big building downtown. The storage facility is pretty standard. A main floor where you drive in, a basement level where my units are, and 2 floors above. There are 2 elevators, a tiny one that barely fits 1 person and a larger one that can squeeze in 2 or 3 people if they don't mind getting cozy. So, there I was, pulling up to the building in my beat-up pickup truck. I had a bunch of new supplies to unload, and I was already running late for a meeting with a potential investor. As I drove in, I noticed a moving truck parked in the main area. No big deal, right? People move stuff in and out all the time. But then I saw them, a group of about 10 people, all bustling around with every single cart the storage place owns. Now, these carts are a godsend when you're trying to lug heavy boxes around, and there are usually plenty to go around. But not today. These folks had commandeered all 8 of them. Feeling a bit annoyed but trying to stay polite, I approached the nearest person, a woman with a severe bob haircut. I politely asked if I could borrow one of the carts for just a few minutes, explaining that I only needed to move a couple of boxes and would bring it right back. The woman, who I'll call Karen, responded with a voice dripping with disdain. She flatly refused, saying they needed all the carts to move their stuff. I tried to reason with her, pointing out that they surely didn't need all 8 carts at once and that I'd only need it briefly. But Karen cut me off mid-sentence, repeating her refusal and telling me to find my own cart. Now, I'm not usually one to lose my cool, but something about her tone and attitude just rubbed me the wrong way. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that it wasn't worth getting into an argument over. I thanked her anyway and walked away. I trudged over to the larger elevator, resigned to making multiple trips up and down with my arms full of boxes. As the doors closed and I began my descent to the basement level, a thought struck me. These entitled cart hoarders were moving stuff to the top floor while I was heading to the bottom. That's when I had my little idea. Was it petty? Absolutely. Was it a bit mean-spirited? Perhaps. But in that moment, all I could think about was wiping that smug look off Karen's face. As soon as I reached the basement, I grabbed a small empty box from my unit and wedged it in the elevator door, preventing it from closing. With a satisfied smirk, I set about my business, taking my sweet time organizing my supplies, making a few phone calls, and even doing some light cleaning. What was supposed to be a quick 5-minute trip turned into an hour-long endeavor. I could almost hear the frustration building up above me as the entitled group realized they couldn't use the main elevator. Finally, after I'd stretched out my tasks as long as I reasonably could, I gathered up what I needed and headed back to the main level. As the elevator doors opened, I was greeted by a sight that filled me with a mixture of guilt and satisfaction. There, lined up in front of the tiny elevator, were 4 very annoyed-looking people, including Karen herself. They were forced to go up one at a time, their progress painfully slow compared to what it would have been with a larger elevator. Karen glared at me and complained about how long they had been waiting because the big elevator wasn't working. I feigned innocence. expressing surprise and suggesting that maybe the elevator was just temperamental. One person was complaining about how ridiculous the situation was and how they'd never finish at this rate. Another mentioned their claustrophobia acting up due to having to use the tiny elevator. Karen was huffing about how they should have hired professional movers, calling the whole situation a disaster. Was it the most mature way to handle the situation? Probably not. But in that moment, it felt like a small victory for all the little guys who've ever been pushed around by entitled people. And hey, if nothing else, it made for a pretty good story to tell at the next small business owners meetup. I moved to the city for my new job at a tech startup. That's when I stumbled upon an ad for a shared house. It seemed perfect. Affordable rent, great location, and the chance to make new friends. There were 4 of us in total living in the house. Me, 2 guys who worked in finance, and her. At first, everything seemed fine. We all got along well enough, shared some meals, and even had a few game nights. But then, things started to change. It began with small comments here and there. She'd mention how she always remembered to buy toilet paper, or how she was the one who organized the cleaning schedule. We didn't think much of it at first. But then, one day, we each found an envelope slipped under our doors. I opened mine, expecting maybe an invitation to a house meeting or something. Instead, I found an invoice. An actual, itemized invoice for things like reminder to take out trash, 5 deals, emotional support during work stress, 25s, and purchasing of communal milk, $3 plus $10 service fee. I thought it was a joke at first. I mean, it had to be, right? But when I went downstairs, I found my roommate standing in the kitchen, holding similar envelopes and looking just as confused as I felt. That's when she walked in, all smiles like nothing was wrong. She cheerfully asked when we could pay the invoices. We were shocked and asked if she was serious. She confirmed that she was, explaining that she had been doing all the mental and emotional labor in the house for months, and it was time we started pulling our weight. We protested, pointing out that we paid rent, did our chores, and bought groceries. We asked what more she wanted from us. She dismissed our contributions as a bare minimum, describing how much energy it took to keep the household running smoothly, remembering when bills were due, and noticing when supplies were low. She claimed she was tired of doing it all for free. We tried to reason with her, explaining that these things were just part of being a good roommate and that we all contributed in our own ways. But she wouldn't listen. She accused the men of not understanding the concept of emotional labor and told me, as a woman, that I should know better. She insisted she wasn't asking for much, just fair compensation for her time and effort. When we refused to pay, calling the whole thing ridiculous, she threatened to take us to court. We laughed it off at first, thinking she was bluffing. But a week later, we each received a summons to small claims court. She was actually going through with it. The day of the hearing, she showed up with a massive binder, easily 100 pages thick. As we sat in the courtroom, she began presenting her case, flipping through page after page of meticulously documented infractions. She detailed specific instances where she had to remind us to clean or provide emotional support, claiming these actions caused her stress and took time away from her own work and self-care. The judge looked bewildered but let her continue. Then, to our shock, she called up her expert witness, a self-proclaimed emotional labor consultant she'd found online. The consultant gave a speech about how the plaintiff's actions were compensable emotional labor, arguing that society often overlooks the invisible work that goes into maintaining a household and nurturing relationships. He praised her for recognizing her worth and seeking fair compensation. At this point, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up and addressed the judge directly. I argued that what was being described wasn't emotional labor, but basic human decency and the bare minimum expected when living with others. I explained that we all contributed to the household in various ways, and just because she chose to document every little thing she did, didn't mean we owed her money for it. The judge listened intently, then turned to my other roommates who shared similar sentiments, and he finally spoke. He acknowledged the thoroughness of her documentation but found no legal basis for her claims. He explained that living in a shared space requires cooperation and mutual respect, not nickel and diming your housemates for every perceived act of kindness. The case was dismissed, but the story doesn't end there. When we got home, we found she'd locked herself in her room. The next day, she announced she was moving out, claiming we were toxic and didn't appreciate her. As she was packing her things, I couldn't resist. I slipped an invoice under her door for emotional distress caused by frivolous lawsuits, $1,000, and time wasted in court, $500. I never expected her to pay it, of course, but the sputtering sounds of outrage from her room made it all worth it. Always, always read the fine print before signing a lease.